Hello everyone, I am Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, and this is the Weaponized Literacy Podcast. Over the past year, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with investigative reporters, social activists, astrophysicists, philosophers, military veterans, and just plain old writers. We discuss life, death, and all of the things that happen in between. Our goal is to use the power of the written word to create a better understanding of the world around us and the people that live in it. We do this by reading with purpose, and we invite you to join in our effort to weaponize literacy. Hello everyone, I am Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore, and our guest tonight is writer, teacher, and editor working at the intersection of health and humanities. She is the author of the award-winning nonfiction book, Maps Are Lines We Draw, A Road Trip Through Haiti. She holds a master's degree in creative nonfiction from the University of Missouri, co-facilitates a course in narrative medicine at the University of Utah, and is earning her MS in narrative medicine at Columbia University. Her work has been featured in the Los Angeles Review of Books and the Journal of American Medical Association. Ladies and gentlemen, Allison Coffelt. Thanks for joining us tonight, Allison.
Thank you for having me.
And I do want to thank Feliza and Lanternfish Press for helping organize this event tonight. They've been really great to work with over the last few months, and we have more events scheduled with them. Before we hop into the book, as I was reading your bio, I'm very curious, what is narrative medicine?
Yeah, great question. So the way I like to describe it, so narrative medicine is a field that came around in the early 2000s. It was founded at Columbia by, among many other people, a physician and a Henry James scholar named Rita Sharon. And essentially what the field does, and it's had a lot of growth and it's continuing to evolve, so it's a really exciting time to be involved with the field. But the field really asks, what are the skills and the practices from the humanities, from reading, from writing, from critical thinking, and those kinds of tools we sharpen in the humanities? How can we bring those tools into a clinical setting to make it better for both the clinician and the patient? So, for example, if you think about how a story works, and maybe you think about narrative structure, how can some understanding of narrative structure or trauma theory be really helpful when you're sitting down across from a patient? And so it really kind of focuses on that clinician side of medicine and asks about bringing in, the humanities, the narrative into the medicine space.
So that ties in well with kind of the work that you were doing there of telling that story.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've actually wanted to go into that program at Columbia for a long time, but funnily enough, COVID made it possible because part of the program went online, so I was able to start online, and I'll finish it up this fall.
Yeah. Your book details your experience in Haiti, as well as over 200 years worth of history. And for a book this thin, I was shocked with just how much I learned and how much information and detail was packed into it. So well done there. What first sparked your interest in Haiti?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that to get it that tight, it took a lot of editing. So
yeah.
I can talk about that later. I first became interested in Haiti, and I write about this, as you know, a little bit in the beginning of the book. It was a book that brought me to an interest in Haiti. So I read the book Mountains Beyond Mountains, which many of us and probably listeners are really familiar with, by Tracy Kidder. I read it when I was 15, and I had a really remarkable teacher who challenged us to kind of think about the world outside of just the classroom and the kind of high school drudgery. And reading that book and then learning about the work of Partners in Health kind of set me on this journey to ask why it is that something can be situated so in a certain way in one part of the world and so different in another way. And so that for me became about health. Why is it that it can be so different in a sense of here versus in a sense of there, which is something that I go on to explore in the book. And so after becoming introduced to Haiti as this place where they have this really rich history, it has a really interesting history. It's the first country. It's like the third in the sort of like U.S. Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and it's the first slave revolt country that successfully like defeated a huge superpower at the time, which was France. So I mean, talk about an underdog story. Once I started to learn about more of the history of Haiti, eventually about, I guess it was probably 7 or 8 years later, I actually got to go to Haiti, and then that's kind of where the book and the narrative arc of the book starts to take place.
And you talk about in the book your avoidance of the mission trip story. So can you explain what the mission trip story is, and then what the difference is and what you were doing there?
Yeah. So I think for me it was really important, and it does link, as you mentioned, Bob, at the beginning, right into thinking about in healthcare narratives, right? So we all kind of have these narratives that we carry around. In healthcare, maybe it's a certain narrative of a kind of illness or experience of disease. But to go back to the book, one of the things that felt really important to me was I had read about a lot of the ways in which some short-term work does more harm than good. And it felt very important to me for a number of years, I wanted to go to Haiti. I wanted to spend time meeting people, but I wasn't sure, like I wasn't bringing any kind of value add, so to speak. I wasn't a physician. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't someone who could help set up infrastructure for plumbing. And so I really had to wrestle with the question of, why would I go when I could donate the money that I would use on a plane ticket? Why would I go when I could, if I would be a burden to the people who are hosting me? And so for me, it was important to kind of think really critically about the trip before I went, and I vacillated on, going or not going for many years. And when I did finally go, this book kind of came out of that. And so for me, it's also been alongside of the journey of going and writing about Haiti. It's been a journey of learning how the arts and how narrative can work and function inside social justice issues and inside health equity issues.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed your writing style that you used throughout the book, and it shifts throughout the book, but your focus on language, whenever you're using a word, you're very clear on why you're using that word. You define words like travel, compassion, having the difference of like the dichotomy between here, there, first, third, translate, interpret. Let's talk about we can get into now your writing and your editing. What was your process as you were approaching kind of detailing the work that you did over there?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you noticing that. To me, it was really important to have a very close attention to language with this book, because so often when we could be, in this case, it's a white writer who is writing about someplace other than her, it's like writing about another country. It can be really easy to fall into sort of like tropes of language. So things like going down there, or, thinking about down. It's like, well, so what does that mean? Like if you're going down somewhere, does that automatically sort of position your current place as above something? And is that a problem? It might not be. I mean, I use that term all the time. If I live in Utah now, and if I go down to the desert, it's because I'm driving south, But at other times, it can be a way of letting beliefs around, basically colonial beliefs kind of creep into our everyday language. So language was super important to me, and using specific and precise language was super important to me. And then, to your point about using words like travel and compassion, I really wanted to unpack what it was that we were thinking about when we were thinking about these things. I was fortunate enough the book won an award from the Society of American Travel Writers. It won the book award, and the judges called it a highly unusual travel travel memoir, which I felt like was a real compliment. So similar to wanting to kind of question a mission trip narrative, I also wanted to question a travel narrative. I wanted to call into question like what we expect when we read about travel.
I would take highly unusual than run-of-the-mill travel.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
And continuing on with the writing structure, I enjoyed there was kind of a separation between chapters that helped. I think it helped you pack in all of the information that you had, where rather than going into full narratives and pages upon pages, there was the click image section of the book where you're just detailing quickly very specific things that they're just a couple sentences each of the images that you're describing of your experience there, but it tells a lot. And then where it went into a lot of the history of the beginnings and middles and endings, it was a nice way to have that balance. So just not a question there, but I just really appreciated what you were doing. Actually, the question would be, how did you determine, like, what was your thought process behind how you set that structure up?
No, I appreciate that question, because I think it connects to thinking and wanting to address what it is people often think about when they think about Haiti, which I think you could also say this about other places as well. But, I'm specifically interested in looking at Haiti. And so I think for me, there's this portion of the book, and for those of us in the conversation who haven't read it yet, it says like click kind of in italics to sort of signal this camera lens. And then it just gives a description of an image. And what I wanted to do there was capture the ways that we kind of have these, just try to put down into words the way that we have these snapshots that come to mind. Like I'm thinking about how many of us have seen, a piece of mail that asks for money for an organization, and there are these faces of kids, and it's like, who are they? Like, where are they? And they seem to be like photographs, like not just stock photography. They seem, which could be photographs, but you know what I'm saying? They seem to be nonfiction photos. And I wanted to kind of ask us to think about the way images are used to create a perception of a place as exotic or suffering or poor or but resilient or, whatever it is. And really just think about how those really quick snapshots can shape our whole understanding of somewhere that's quote unquote there. And then in terms of the beginning, middle, and ending, I really wanted to interrogate how we told the stories of the U.S., how we told stories of the U.S. involvement in Haiti, as well as like how we kind of, in contemporary, Western culture and specifically contemporary U.S. culture, how do we conceptualize Haiti? So I think for a lot of us, we conceptualize it as this place that had a really bad earthquake in 2010. Of course, there was just an earthquake very recently, which I think we'll talk about at some point. We think of it as maybe tents everywhere, or nonprofit, overrun by nonprofit. But if we start the story at a different point, we might think of it as the place where Bill and Hillary went on their honeymoon, which was like a really weird and interesting fact I found when I was doing research. So basically, like Mick Jagger, like hung out on the beaches there. Like it was like a hot destination for a while. We might think of it as a place, if we go even back further, where freedom was born on this little like part of a Caribbean island in the Western Hemisphere. And like I said earlier, one of the world's largest superpowers was defeated. So what I wanted to do was ask the reader to think about how they conceptualize beginning, middle, and end. And of course, this has implications for far beyond how we think about Haiti as well. But I wanted to call attention to that. I wanted to like clearly label it middle of the story, end of the story, to really ask, like, is that true? Is that how would it feel if we ordered it differently? How would it feel if we started somewhere else or ended somewhere else?
And one of the many things that I learned from this book is the origins of first world, second world, and third world countries. Can you, for people watching that don't know, I'll let you give the explanation on the origin of those classifications for countries.
Yeah. And again, I think this speaks to your question of language earlier. It's all very interwoven. You can't start to kind of pull on one without unraveling a lot of other pieces. But First World was a construct that came around in the Cold War, and First World was sort of seen as the U.S. and the U.S.'s territories and other sort of democratic countries. The Second World was going to be those communist countries and the Soviet Union, and then the Third World was sort of everywhere else that hadn't, maybe been claimed yet by these two superpowers who were racing to kind of scoop up strategic allies or strategic points on the map. So that's kind of where we get that, or that is where we get that framework. And I think it's interesting to think about what it would mean to feel like you were born in a third world. Like I was born in the US, like I've not had this experience, but like how would it feel if like the whole rest of the world, second world, of course, you don't hear that anymore, but first and third world have kind of stuck around. So it's interesting to think about like how would it feel if that was sort of the category that your country was placed in your.
Well, I think it's something that I had gone through personally. I'm a seminary dropout. And while I was going through that experience of religion and what idea is the right idea, and just kind of thought of like the happenstance of where you happen to be born. And there's so much that's associated with that, of especially America and the superiority that we feel. And we could have just as easily been born somewhere else and not have had that fortune. So I like that you specifically highlighted that idea of what would happen if we were born somewhere else.
And that's something that's really been, I think that's such I'm just so glad you brought that up, because I think that's such a question a lot of us don't always think about. And I certainly don't think about it every day, but it's something I thought about since I was 15 and read this book, that really set me on this path to look at a wider world. I think literature has the power to do that, to widen your perspective, to change the way that you sort of order things in your life. I think that there's a scene really early in the book where I just remember being a kid, and I have my finger on this globe that we had in our living room, and I'm spinning the globe and imagining okay, wherever it lands is where I'll live someday. And I think even as a child, I had this sense of this seems really random, and I grew up in a religious household that was very, this notion of things, happening for a reason or something. But at the end of the day, it still felt pretty just lucky, to just be born where you were. And also, I think we can extend that to, thinking about what if I had been born a different race? What if I had been born, in a different class? And any number of things that just sort of you don't ask for, but they inform your lived experience.
Yes. And so much of that goes into your idea of here and there and us and them. I wrote on the top of one of the pages, some people get really mad that I write in books. My daughter didn't like them. But
does she think it's disrespectful, or what's her quibble?
I think because she's 7 and I tell them to not write on different things.
That's fair. They can't write on the walls. You can't write in books.
Tangent. I recently painted the living room, and my son's just very into drawing right now. And we have nice new white windows, frames, and sills, and now there's some artwork on them. but struggling to get back to where I was.
No, it's fine. It's great.
A tangent on my children is always worthwhile. So
yeah, absolutely.
What was your hope for this book to try to bridge that gap or remove that separation of us and them and here and there?
Oh man, yeah, I think there's so much cool theory around like us and them and a sense of other, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was deeply was like a very deep undercurrent in this book. I don't know, like I truly don't know. I think it's probably like the definition of enlightenment that you get to a point where that boundary disappears between a here and a there, between us and a them. Like some traditions might call that enlightenment. I think what I was hoping to do was maybe a little less ambitious, which was, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, that would be, I think, really transformative to be able to sort of, make that.
I lost your audio.
Oh,
there you are.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I'm not actually sure. Let me know if it's hard to hear, okay?
Okay.
There we go. Now I can hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay. That's all right.
So, yeah, I think that, let me try one more thing to troubleshoot.
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay, we're back to where we started. You can edit that out.
All right. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't mention it at the beginning, and I don't know if Lanternfish did either, but we have started editing these into a podcast. So this is live. So
I saw your tag. Yeah. I saw the tag podcast. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, I know.
People watching it enjoyed the technical, but I'll edit this out.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it is so. I'm sure everyone at home can empathize. Too many Zoom calls these days where that happens. But going back to here and there, I think my ambition was maybe even a little smaller in that what I really would, it's hard to say hope for someone to take away because I really try to release expectation of the reader. Like once you sort of put a book out in the world, it's not yours anymore. Mm-hmm. In some ways, in many ways. But I think I was really aiming to just ask people, I think of it in terms of almost like these concentric circles. And so what would it be like if, sure, we all sort of have our closest beloveds, like our friends, our family, our closest ones in this sort of like close-knit circle. But then what if we just kept drawing these concentric circles outward and we were able to include caring and compassion and a sense of community wider and wider out. And so I think that's, and further, I think even like thinking about time, further back in time, further forward into the future. I think if, for example, we were able to do that around climate change, we might have a very different response than we do right now. So I think the goal of the book is to ask people, where do you draw your circle in terms of like, I care and then I just stop caring? Mm-hmm. And like, can that line be moved? Can that be squishy?
Okay. I like that. I'm going to write that down. The part of that separation, the word blonde that comes up in the book. Can you kind of give us the definition of what that means, and then also the meaning of being called that?
Yeah. So blonde is, literally it means white, but it really has to do with being foreign. So it's a smart way to position that question right after thinking about extending our circles of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it also demonstrates that in every culture, there's a sense of an outsider, right? We see this in towns, like, are you from here? Are you, where are you from? If like, so again, I live in Utah right now, and, often a question is like, oh, are you from Utah? And that tells me something, right? It might not tell me something accurate, but I have a sense of like, oh, where did you grow up then? And so Blonde is really about being not from Haiti when you're in Haiti, being not being Haitian. Even like I've even spoken with folks who are like, it's not necessarily just about race, because I've spoken to folks who are like Black physicians who are from the US, and they go to Haiti and they'll still be considered blonde. So it really does have to, it's kind of a way of signaling outsider. Yeah.
It's interesting how the identity doesn't always have to be tied to race. We did an event with Dax Devlin Ross last month, and he's an African-American man who actually did some work in Africa after law school. And when he was there, and it was still during apartheid, he was considered white because he was American.
Because he was American. Yeah.
Yeah. Your experience.
It speaks to the layers of identity that we all kind of, carry.
Mm-hmm. There was my father-in-law actually did some work in Haiti, helping to build up the police force there in the mid 90s. And he was, I can't remember if it was Mr. Blonde or Sir Blonde. He was like, didn't know the meaning behind it. It's like, is that, should I be worried about that? Like, no, that's the thing. Your, kind of your experience feeling is a specific experience that you outlined, feeling as an outsider there, or just kind of dealing with the difference was detailed in your story of after the soccer game, and the woman who came up to you. Can you kind of run us through that story and your emotions and thoughts running through it?
Yeah, it was probably one of the more difficult parts to write in the book and experiences to write about, because we had just finished playing like this community game of soccer and hanging out, and I was headed back to OSAPO, a clinic where I was staying with Dr. Gardy, who you meet in the book, and he's a Haitian doctor who started a clinic in a rural part of Haiti, a little bit north of Port-au-Prince. And this, I'm asked, are you talking about the watch, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'm asked, I'm wearing like this sort of older sports watch that isn't particularly fancy. It's, this is like pre-smartwatch. It's not like, it's just like a Timex or something, right? Maybe like $15. And she asked me for some money, and I didn't have any money. And I like really didn't have any money because I didn't have money in my pockets. I was just going to play soccer. And so I said, I don't have any. And she kind of looked around and asked then for the watch. And I felt this, I still am to this day, I'm not sure. I did not give it to her. And I'm still wondering like why, because it's sort of like, it didn't matter to me. I don't even know where that watch is anymore, but there was this notion of sort of being confronted with the fact that like I had enough money to get on a plane and like get to Haiti and spend time there, and am writing about it, and that's clear, like that's like whether or not that's said or not to like the people you encounter, it's evident by virtue of your presence. So it was a really I'll let our readers read like sort of the more details about it in the book, but it was an experience I still think about, and I'm not sure, I was sort of taken aback, and so I just said like no, because I like use my watch. But it's like I don't, like looking back, it's sort of like I don't know that was the right thing. Right. But I think it sort of points to maybe a discomfort that a lot of people feel when they're asked, outright for something.
Mm-hmm. Kind of on the similar line of giving, I wanted to talk about international aid and the complications that go with that. You had said in the book that you had kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is how I'm remembering, of kind of negative feelings about international aid and the way it operates. And those feelings kind of grew during your time over there. Can you talk to us a bit about what you experienced over there and what you learned in terms of how international aid works and how it can impact the country?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by sort of saying, for people who are really interested in this, there are a lot of really good books about this, and it's not a settled question. There was a book that, got a lot of attention 10 years ago called Dead Aid. There's also, work by folks like Jeffrey Sachs, who really demonstrate the ways in which aid can be helpful. So I just want to set that up to say that it's a big topic, and I encourage people who are reading and listening to dive in on their own as well. From my perspective, I've worked for nonprofits who have done work in Haiti. I was there visiting nonprofits, one of which was a US-based nonprofit that was working in Haiti and has been for 10 or 15 years and is primarily employing Haitians. The other was OSAPO, which is Gardy's clinic, which is founded and run and operated by Haitians. It's precarious because there isn't really much at all of a safety net, especially right now in Haiti, with the lack of a governmental structure with what happened, last month, and which was the murder of the sitting president. Mm-hmm. And then with now another earthquake from a week and a half ago, there isn't much of a safety net, is what I'm saying. And really, there isn't a safety net. And so one of the things that some organizations can do is provide support where the government or other groups aren't able to. At the same time, I think it's really important to ask, and the question I really just want to hit home is, does an organization that's working there, are they trying to work themselves out of a job? Are they do they have an exit strategy in the sense of, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 12 years, but do they have a sense of, we're building capacity, we're investing in local people, we're trying to basically get it so that the blondes can leave and still have the work continue? So I think that's a question that I use to sort of vet nonprofits. Disaster relief, straight up disaster relief, is a little bit different because you need a massive influx of surgeons that you might not need when it's not a disaster time. Mm-hmm. But I am very critical of nonprofit and international aid specifically in the book, because often what I found from speaking with people in Haiti was that money went to waste, or it stayed in administrative hands and it didn't make it to the people who needed it most. And there's been a number of reports on that have come out since the aid from the 2010 earthquake. And also that sometimes it put people who are local out of a job. So I give, the example of the rice. If there's a ton of free rice, then it's going to be really hard for rice farmers. In Haiti, you have to sell the rice for a living to thrive, for example. Mm-hmm. So that is a very long answer, but it is a super complicated question. And I definitely is a touchstone that I kind of keep coming back to in the book.
And so there's the certain level of kind of, I don't know if it's straight out corruption, but for the people that are the nonprofits that are there and they need to continue to exist, they need people to rely on them so they exist. But then there's also the other end of it. And I pulled a quote of, "I knew by then the creeping understanding that it was so easy, inevitable to harm while helping." And the HIV example was one that really stuck out at me, that the amount of help that they were receiving was, to quote Dr. Gardy, was too much. If you can kind of explain that to...
Yeah, I mean, I think really what that points to is having more community collaboration. And so I think one of the things that can be easy for nonprofits to do is, especially if they are funded, to just throw money at a problem and not necessarily have a community, like not really be employing the community and figure out what are reasonable wages. So another example in the book is, a nurse I work with who's Canadian, who's been living in Haiti for several years and working for Maison de Naissance, which is now called Global Birthing Home. And she points out an NGO that, has really good intentions, like this speaks to the quote you pulled, to pay people a high wage for a new hospital that they're building. But if that wage, and so it seems like, oh, that's a great idea. The issue then, though, is that the wage is maybe not sustainable if like people in Haiti were to be able to take that over, because the hospital fees might not cover those kinds of wages. There might not be enough government support to cover those kinds of wages. And it sets an expectation up that, if you want to make some good or some quick money, work for a work for an NGO, or don't work for a local state-run or a maybe more community-based healthcare facility. Go work for an NGO. So it really, that would be, that's another example of thinking like, oh, this seems great, but like, how much harm are we doing as well?
I want to take this time, if anyone watching has any questions for Allison, please use the comment feature on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube to throw those in, and we'll incorporate them as we can. We've referenced Dr. Gardy, but we haven't talked specifically about him. And he is just kind of, when I was heading into the book, before I read a page, I kind of thought it was going to be the mission trip story. And I was surprised that it wasn't, and that it was more the history of Haiti. And it was also very much the story of Dr. Gardy. Who was he to you, and what work is he doing there now?
Yeah, Dr. Gardy is a really good friend of mine. He is a physician who was born in Haiti. He grew up learning many different languages. At this point, I believe, and I'll have to reference my own book to make sure this is completely right, but it was like French, English, obviously Haitian Creole, Spanish, and a little bit of German at last count. So he's a remarkable, highly educated person with an enormous heart. He's a Haitian physician who started a clinic, like I mentioned earlier, just sort of north of Port-au-Prince, northeast of Port-au-Prince, in a really small village called Rousseau. And what Gardy, really what ended up being was, I met him through a friend of a friend. Gardy is, as a physician, he's actually come to the U.S. several times to offer. He did the grand rounds, for example, for the emergency department at the University of Missouri. He has several friends in medicine who are also in medicine in Nebraska. So he's got a lot of connections and friends and colleagues who also were in healthcare in Haiti and then moved to the U.S. So he has a lot of connections to the U.S. And so I met him through one of those connections. And, what sort of turned out as I thought, I met him through a friend of a friend. He's going to be in Lake High visiting his mother. I need to get from Lake High to Port-au-Prince. Like, he'll help me get, he was going to give me a ride. It was sort of all set up. through mutual friends. And he ended up being, this really having this remarkable life story about essentially escaping an abusive home, living on the streets, and then eventually going to medical school. And ironically, even though we've been really challenging mission trip narratives, I think it's important to note that the person who paid for his medical school was an American who did so because he had been going to Haiti on mission trips for so long. So I think, as an aside, I would really want to point out that I would really like to say that, it's never, I feel like what I learned when I was writing the book is that it was never as simple as X equals good, Y equals bad,
Yeah.
Is A good? Is it bad? Like, it's always more complicated that is mission trip. Are they good? Are they bad? Well, it depends, and so, so yeah, that's a little bit about him. He's doing all right. I talked to him a few weeks ago after the earthquake there. And, he's really, it's been really, really hard, but, he is alive and, working, and doctoring in the middle of this disaster.
It was, I'm sure, more jarring for you than it was for me, but I had just finished the book like a day or two before the earthquake.
Oh.
And I'm like, I just read about all these people. So my first thought, was Dr. Gardy.
Yeah.
So when we were speaking before we started it, I was relieved to hear that he's doing okay. I'm sure overwhelmed and extremely busy. But,
well, and I can share a little bit more. We were in communication. He is from Lake High, which is very close to the epicenter of this earthquake that just happened. Was it a week ago Saturday? Is that right?
That sounds right.
In the morning. So, and today is, goodness, what's the date?
25th.
Yeah. So it this just happened. He wrote a handful of different people that he knows to kind of give an update. And like I said, he's from Lake High. His mother still lives there. And they had a very traumatic experience with this earthquake that his mother watches his daughter and a few of his nieces and nephews. So there's 4 children in the house. His mother and 3 children were outside preparing breakfast when the earthquake hit, and his mother ran back into the house and pulled his daughter from bed because it was early morning. Came back out before part of the house crumbled. So it does hit very, very close to home for him.
Kind of aside from the assassination and the earthquake, these immediate concerns, and even not even just Haiti, but do you have any sort of guidance or advice on how people that are just don't have the means or the inclination to travel, but feel inclined to want to help? What kind of steps would you recommend taking, just in terms of general, not specific to the earthquake?
Yeah. Well, I will share a couple of links for donations to 3 different organizations that I really trust. Obviously, again, I do encourage you to do your own research. These are 2 of the organizations, the birthing home that I spent time at and the clinic. And, those are organizations that have been doing good work, run, in the case of OSAPO, completely Haitian clinicians, and in the case of the birthing home, largely employed and co-run by Haitian clinicians. And then I'll also share one other link to an organization that's been doing, called Equal Health, that's been doing long-term work in Haiti for completely free. They're a group of Haitian Americans, as well as Americans who are working in solidarity. And they do different capacity building and organizational building in Haiti. And then 100% of those funds would go towards supporting work in Haiti, and not towards administrative fees. Again, it's hard because I also don't want to say never give to something that has administrative fees, because they're not always all bad. So again, it's that complexity, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and post those in the chat right now.
Okay. Well, if you want to, because I'm going to plug some other books, but is there anything before you post the links, anything you would want to add to people watching or listening?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say thanks to you for hosting, and I really hope that more people pick up this book. I think that even if Haiti is something that doesn't particularly, like, you've never thought, oh, I really want to learn more about that country, I think there's a lot of U.S. history in this book, and there's a lot of questions around just how we kind of build connection with one another. So I'd like to think it's relevant, during a pandemic. I'd like to think it's relevant, for this time too.
Well, thank you again so much for joining and speaking with us. We have copies of the book, Maps Are Lines We Draw, in store. They're also available to purchase on our website. If you're watching or listening not from the area, head to your independent bookstore and ask them to order it in if they don't already have it on the shelf. I learned so much from this book and really appreciated the insight that you provided. So thank you for that. And
thank you.
Just wanted to see. Oh, we have a last minute question.
Sure.
From Laney Lane. They've spent a lot of time in Haiti while starting an orphanage. This family took in children. I'm certain that it is common across the country. If the government wasn't corrupt, could they get aid?
I'm just rereading the question here.
Yes.
So I think, if you want to, Lainey, I'm not 100% sure with the quotations around orphanage. I assume you mean that there's something fishy going on. I think that your question, though, is also, is pointing to how can we really help or feel like we're helping when there are a lot of stories about the money not going where it needs to go. And I think that's a really important question. And that is one that, I was on a conference call with some folks from Equal Health, which I posted the link for them in the chat, the conference call was a coalition of Haitian Americans and Haitians who were just holding space around a response for the earthquake, just kind of in community and holding space. And I know that there's a lot of desire from a lot of people to with this round of, unfortunately, disaster, to do things differently. After 2010, there was a lot of capacity building in some of the healthcare circles that I'm familiar with. And I think when we think about what I'm interpreting as the root of your question, which is like, how do we help when we're not sure, I would say trying to do a little bit more. I'm not saying you haven't done this, but like doing research into where we're giving money. I think doing research into where we're giving money, making sure that the organizations are run by Haitians, are relatively small, have lower overhead than some, like, for example, USAID or other things like that. So that's how I would probably respond. Thank you for your question.
All right. I think you shared. Oh, no, you didn't share the links. That was the question that popped up. So if you wanted to go back to sharing the links, and I will plug some events that we have coming up. If you're in the Lakewood area, this coming Saturday, just in a few days, from 11 to 1, we'll have Christian Reiber here signing copies of a book he contributed to called Dare to Be Authentic. It's kind of a self-help book for people who don't like self-help books. Christian Reiber is a local nutrition and fitness specialist. So that's 11 to 1. Our next virtual author event is another Lanternfish Press event with Andrew Katz. The Vampire Gideon Suicide Hotline and Halfway House for Orphan Girls. eventually I'll remember that full title without having to read it. It is a dark comedy that deals with the topic of suicide. Whenever Andrew does an event, he likes to partner with a local nonprofit that deals with suicide prevention. We will be doing that. His event is Wednesday, September 8th at 7 p.m., and we're partnering with the Suicide Prevention Alliance of Chautauqua County. So they will be on the call with us, and we'll be trying to raise some money for them. So please tune into that or give us your money. Give them your money, not me. Buy the book. September 22nd, another Wednesday at 7 p.m. This is Steerforth Press, Unstitched, and it is a librarian in Vermont who, it's a small town that's dealing with an opioid epidemic, and she is trying to get a better understanding of what's going on in her town. So she interviews a lot of people in the area, a lot of experts to get her own understanding, but then put it in the book and to put out into the world so people can get their own level of understanding of what the opioid crisis is, why it's happening, what people, individuals and families are dealing with, and potentially how to help with that. This event I have been stressed about since we booked. It's going to be October 13th, another Wednesday at 7 p.m. This is Tufa. Tufa is a woman from Gambia. She was sexually assaulted by the president of Gambia. She came forward with her story. It's sparked a Me Too movement in Gambia that spread through Africa. She's now a student in Toronto. This is her book that's coming out in October. We'll be talking to her the day after it comes out. So tune into that one, pick up a copy of the book. You can place a pre-order as well. And you can head to our website, obpbooks.com. There we have events booked through November, so there's even more that we didn't get into. Thank you again so much, Allison, for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to let you know, I actually wasn't able to post the links because I didn't see I couldn't somehow send. I could see a couple of comments, and I saw your follow-up, Lainey. Thank you. But
if you want to email me those links, and then I'll share those out.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much, Bob. And thanks to everyone who's listening.